All right, well, joining us now, the closer for today's show. You can hear him on Niners Nightly and the Krug Show all week as we get ready for the draft coming up on Thursday.
Ladies and
gentlemen,
Hayden Bird song.
Yeah, well, and we'll talk some Hayden Bird song. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Krueger. What's up, Krug?
What's up? What's going on? How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for answering the call today and helping us out as Adam Copeland recuperates from his 40-year-old birthday party.
And I believe I'll be your third guest of the show that also will be having some role in the 49er pre- and post-game show. So there you go.
There you go.
There you go.
Awesome as always. So, Krug, you were at Levi's today. What was the vibe like with John Lynch speaking about the plans for the draft and Brock Purdy's contract?
Well, it's a really interesting little exercise because I think it was invented originally to try to drive more attention to an event that didn't have a lot of attention, the NFL draft, right? We'll have a little press conference a couple days before, and that will go to the newspapers, and there'll be articles written, and then people will be kind of aware that the draft is out there. Talk about something that's, times have changed. I mean, now there's a path to the draft, and, heck, for some of these teams that have been out of the playoff race, they've been talking about this draft since, November of last year. So, we don't really need this presser, and it's a little bit of an exercise in, let's talk about anything but our intentions, of course.
Right.
I thought it was pretty useful, to be honest. And I thought John gave us some indications that really did kind of advance the thing a little bit. So we definitely can get into it here.
No, definitely. I think that, you and I talked about it over the weekend on a little podcast called Just Your Opinion, man. And Krug, we talked about the possibility.
Great podcast, by the way.
The possibility of the Niners trading down in this draft. And I think that John Lynch kind of didn't tip his hand, but he was saying how I think a lot of teams want to trade down in this draft. And it's going to be difficult because I think a lot of people view a lot of value in later rounds. So did you get the idea that John Lynch wants to trade down, but probably will have a hard time doing so?
Yeah, that's what he pretty much said. The first thing he joked about how, he knows a GM that has a pick in the top 10. And there was a report last week, I think maybe 10 days ago, that the Niners were interested in trading up. John said that his friend who, has a pick in the top 10 called him and said, "Hey, man, I hear you guys are trading up, but you haven't called me yet." So in other words, they're not trading up. I can't really picture a scenario that they would trade up. Maybe there is one, but it's probably low end. Like if Travis Hunter or Mason Graham were literally a pick away, maybe even that, I kind of doubt it. But I asked John the question. Because Matt Miller of ESPN said he thinks that there's going to be a lot of trades.
Yeah.
And then so I asked John, I said, do you think there'll be a lot of trades, or is it hard to get a handle on it this far in front of the draft? And he basically said that he thought that because of the number of teams that would all like to trade back, really, a far greater number than the number of teams that actually would like to trade up, that the prevailing wisdom is that it is a deep draft where you can get starters on day 3. So he said that he thinks that a lot of the people want to all do the same thing, and thus he thinks it will lead to not a lot of trades in round 1.
Yeah, I saw the same thing with Matt Miller saying that the first round could get crazy with trades. I think Ryan Poles even said today in his press conference that he expects it to be crazy, but it's funny how John Lynch doesn't think the same thing. But as far as the way the Niners could handle things in the first round, I brought this up with JD. What do you think about the possibility of the Niners not trading down with their 11th pick, but possibly trading up into the bottom of the first round in order to get 2 guys? Like this would be something they haven't done since 2017, where they got Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster. They traded back in to get him. With so many glaring needs on defense, and specifically the defensive line, do you think there's a possibility the Niners could trade back into the first round to get 2 starters and hopefully 2 guys will make an impact on their defense?
Well, I don't think any idea is crazy, Derek. I really don't. And John kind of made it, he said, hey, look, we can go into this with the great plan, but then once the clock starts ticking and guys start getting picked and things happen, who knows, sometimes there's a trade that makes them, that, there's the reaction to that trade or several other trades. It's an interesting idea. I don't know that the 49ers, they're not one player away, but I think they're also not two players away.
Right.
So I don't see them trading back into the first round, but you never know. I kind of see, the 49ers, seeing if they could trade back maybe in the first and second round. We don't really know who they're interested in. We know their needs, right? Offensive line, defensive line, edge rusher, linebacker, wide receiver, corner, maybe running back. We know their needs. As far as how they go about filling them, it's hard to say. They are, one of the rumors that I do believe, I guess, or a couple of the rumors I do believe, is that the Niners do like Olufemi Oladejo, the former Cal Bear, UCLA defensive end. And, he was projected to go like in round 3 or 4, and he's like one of the fast risers. So now a lot of people think that he's going to go in the second round. Well, the Niners have the 43rd pick overall. That's kind of a high second round pick. I could see them maybe trading down a little bit in the round and taking him. Brock Purdy, I also asked John today, because Brock Purdy had a quote the other day with Daniel Jeremiah where it's pretty clear that Brock Purdy has watched Jalen Noel from Iowa State. He's one of the 2 Iowa State receivers. And I said, John, does Brock, I mean, I know you guys love Brock. Do you love him so much that you seek his opinion out on some of these receivers? Does he give opinions? And John joked that usually it takes to your 6th or 7th year before you start, making personnel picks. But he says that Brock does have opinions and that he does like the Iowa State receivers. And so if you saw the quotes to Daniel Jeremiah, I would say there's a pretty good likelihood that the Niners will try to go after Jalen Noel in day 2 of this draft. He's projected to go anywhere in round 2, probably the second half of round 2, maybe round 3. Niners have 3 picks on day 2. If he's there, I would be very surprised if they passed him on day 2, because I think he's a receiver that is dynamic. He's a 4.3 speed guy. He's a very strong receiver. Purdy clearly is a big fan. And we're not talking about, your nickel corner. We're talking about a guy who's going to have a huge impact on Brock's career. So who knows? Maybe they'll listen to Brock on this one, and I could see Jalen Noel being a Niner on Friday.
Well, yeah, if they see Brock Purdy as their quarterback of the future, then they should value his opinion on who he wants to throw the ball to. But let's stay on Brock Purdy for a second. So with Brock, he showed up today, and a lot of people think that believes that means that things are trending in the right direction. John Lynch said as much. I mean, do you get the sense that this thing is only a matter of time before this contract gets done if he's showing up to OTAs today, or is it just the fact that Brock's a nice guy, he wasn't going to do anything at the detriment of the team?
Well, I mean, I think Brock he's a really mature young guy. He's a young guy, but he's an old soul. And he knows what he wants. He knows what's important. And he's the one thing about Brock Purdy, he keeps the main thing the main thing. He may do commercials, but he doesn't go Hollywood. You know what I mean?
He's doing corn seed commercials, Krug.
What's that?
He's doing corn seed commercials. I mean, he's doing big ones like Applebee's, but usually it's the corn seed ones.
They're eating good in the neighborhood.
There you go.
But no, Brock Purdy, and this, I bet you his own agent, I mean, probably doesn't love this, but I bet you his agent fears Brock, being unwilling to go to the mattresses, so to speak, for this contract.
Right.
And we'll see. I mean, the Niners have said they're going to be ruthless. Purdy, I'm sure, wants to get it done. And I just think that there's no way that he is going to allow Mac Jones to slide into his job and take his job and lead this football team. No way, no how. And if that means he shows up to phase 1 of OTAs, then he's going to show up for phase 1 of OTAs. Now, I don't think he's going to get on the field because there's just too much to risk, but that's not until late May for the phase 3. And if you said to me, what's the deadline? And I've maintained this for a few months now. I think that's the deadline. So a lot of people said today's the deadline, get it done by OTAs. But this part of OTAs, they don't even go on the field. To me, I think it's that date in May when they go out there for phase 3 of the OTAs. I think if you said, what's the deadline in Brock's mind, he wants it done by then because he doesn't want to hold out even 1 minute. There's no way he's going to allow Mac Jones to go out there and lead this football team. So I think he's going to wind up getting. I think there'll be a little bit of give and take on both sides, but I bet you anything he's there when phase 3 begins.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, and I even told JD we were talking about it. I wouldn't be surprised if Brock is, he's so much about the team that even if a contract doesn't happen by training camp, that he just shows up because he just doesn't want any distractions. And I know that his agent would be like, that's ridiculous, you can't show up. But I can remember a lot of quarterbacks holding out. Not even Dak Prescott held out a season ago. Jordan Love held in for a couple of practices, and then the Packers got it done. But yeah, I don't think it will go down that road. I think that when Jed York, talks about how they've been planning on this contract since November, then they probably should get it done. But I want to ask you about, I saw you tweet this out today, or you responded to it. What do you think about Chris Sims going in on Brock Purdy, saying that he's not a top 10 quarterback and he's only worth like $45 million? And I think that Chris Sims, I think he knows quarterbacks and he breaks it down pretty well. But as far as like his evaluation on Brock Purdy, I think it's a little extreme. And I think also, are you going to say the same thing about Tua? Are you going to say the same thing about Trevor Lawrence, where I don't think those guys are anywhere near what Brock Purdy has accomplished in the NFL, but they're making $50 million a year. So why shouldn't Brock Purdy?
Yeah, I mean, anybody with a mouth can have an assertion. There's a big difference between an assertion and proving your case. I like how he makes this incredibly strong assertion. Brock Purdy's not a top 10 quarterback and offers up nothing.
Yes.
Zero. I'm Chris Sims. I'm supposedly credible. And I'm going to go in on a big platform and say that Brock Purdy's not worthy of top 10 money, and then just assert that he's not a top 10 quarterback and never, ever offer up anything that would even be loosely categorized as an argument or evidence. I mean, he's like the worst attorney in the history of attorneys, if he was one. I mean, people assert all kinds of bogus stuff. We see it on Twitter every day. You can assert whatever you want, but it doesn't mean it's true. And it's like, okay, so you're telling me he's not a top 10 quarterback. So Tua Tagovailoa is?
Yeah, come on now.
So Trevor Lawrence is?
Nope.
So Justin Herbert is? And none of those guys have gone to the Super Bowl, but
right.
Brock Purdy, who has gone to the Super Bowl, clearly is not. I mean, it's just, and then look at the absurdity too. You're going to get all high and mighty that you don't believe the guy deserves to be a top 10 quarterback. You're going to offer no evidence at all. And then you're going to say, so pay him $45 million. If you really are that afraid of what this guy is, wouldn't you say run from him with both feet?
You wouldn't pay him at all.
Don't sign him at all. Get rid of this guy. Go on to the next guy. Instead you're like, you can't pay him that. Pay him $45 million. It's like, what? The big difference is not the difference between 45 and what they ultimately will pay him. The big difference is $900,000 to the 45.
Exactly. And he's all over the place. And he is.
Him and Florio are a gigantic sideshow.
No, they are. I mean, I don't take anything that Florio says seriously. I think that he's knowledgeable about contracts. When it comes to the game of football, I don't think he really knows what he's talking about. But as far as Chris Sims, I mean, he goes on to say, like, the whole league doesn't think that Brock Purdy's a top 10 quarterback. And I would think that if Brock Purdy was a free agent right now, I believe there would be a lot of teams lining up to give him a $50 million contract. And to say, well, he's worth $45 million, he's not worth $50 million. Okay, I mean, like, I think people spend too much time thinking that just because you get paid a certain amount of money as a quarterback means that you're a top 10 quarterback. It does not mean that. Obviously, all these guys that are getting paid, the Tua Tagovailoas you mentioned, Trevor Lawrence's, even Dak Prescott's, I wouldn't put them in a top 10 category when it comes to quarterbacks. They just make that amount of money because that's what the market is right now. It's ridiculous. So, yeah, I thought that whole opinion was ridiculous.
There's a market. If I want to buy a house on 17th in Yoloa, I'm going to have my realtor run the comps for what houses of its size and shape and in that neighborhood are going for. And then I'm going to say, well, that's the market. And then if I want to participate in that market, that's my choice, right? But I can't just sit there and go, I'm ignoring market factors because I choose not to. It's like, It's funny. The 49ers needed a franchise quarterback forever. They had this guy fall in their lap. I think they realize he's got tremendous value. I know there's a lot of, I'll say this, he's not the best quarterback in football, and he's not among the best quarterbacks in football.
Yeah, that's fair.
But, to say he's not worthy of being a top 10 paid quarterback, I would say he is. My contention would be he is really, in the grand scheme of things. Where does Brock Purdy sit? 10, 12, 13, somewhere in there. So if you paid him around top 10 money, I'm totally fine with that. And I think if I was his agent, I would expect that.
It's only fair. I mean, would you say that Jared Goff is a top 10 quarterback?
No. I would think Purdy's better than Goff.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Another guy making north of $50 million.
I think they're similar. I think that, Jared Goff runs that Detroit Lions scheme very well, but is he a top 10 quarterback? No. I mean, we've seen problems with him dating back to the Rams, and that's why Sean McVay moved off of him to go to Matthew Stafford. But we saw a season ago, he threw 5 interceptions in a game and still won. But that playoff game against the Commanders, he was terrible. So, but, you still need a quarterback, so he's paid $53 million a year. He's top 10 when it comes to salary, but you don't put him as a top 10 quarterback. So I think Chris Sims is too focused on, because this guy makes this amount of money, then we should anoint him as one of the greatest quarterbacks in football. And I think that he's got it totally backwards on that.
Well, and then the other argument, I don't know if this is exactly Sims's argument, but for the people that are kind of in that category, make this argument repeatedly. If you sign Brock Purdy, I think Puka Nacua just made this argument, and it's never good to mess with another man's money. And he kind of broke a code by talking about this publicly. But I agree. It seemed innocent enough because he seems pretty young and inexperienced as far as what to say and not say. I'll give Puka that. But it's as a rule of thumb, it's never good to mess with another man's money, regardless of industry. You know what I mean? If you're not really sure, that's the line. So he kind of crossed that line, but he's kind of suggesting what others have suggested, that if you pay Brock Purdy, going rate, market rate, $50 million, north of $50 million, that the Niners Super Bowl window goes up in smoke. And that's a great, compelling argument, except there was this guy named Jalen Hurts, who's very similar to Purdy in a lot of ways, and he just won the Super Bowl, and he does make north of $50 million on a really talented team. So it's hard to argue it can't be done when Jalen Hurts literally just did it.